and welcome to Something Better. It's great to have you here. My name's Robbie. I'm a member of the church staff here, and this whole weekend we've been addressing a whole bunch of different issues to help people explore the Christian faith for themselves, and that claim that Jesus says that he comes so that they may have life to the full. We hope that these Something Better events are a chance for everybody, whoever you are, whether you consider yourself a Christian or not, to explore these things. And we particularly help and welcome those watching online. Just to say, we've had a few different events over the last couple of days. We've talked about the evidence for Jesus, thought about whether Jesus is boring and whether he spoils our fun. We've thought about Christianity in comparison to some other world religions and whether Jesus Christ is exclusive. And if you've not had a chance to catch up with any of those events, then they're all on YouTube. You can watch them or send the links to friends. You'd be so welcome to do that. This evening, we're considering the question of suffering and hope. Where is God when life hurts? And this evening, we're joined by Andrew Satch. Andrew has a background in psychology and neuroscience. He studied here as an undergraduate and is now a pastor in London. He's also the author of a book called, let me get this right, Are You 100% Sure You Want to Be an Agnostic? Intriguing title. And it's a free book too. We've got free copies on offer this evening. Andrew's going to interview Lara, who's a member of our church family, and then after that, that'll be about half an hour. He's going to then speak for around half an hour. The whole event will be finished by around 9:15 p.m. or before. Just the last thing from me, if you need the loo at any point, it's in the back in the corner, and you're more than welcome just to stand up and head out if you'd like that. Let me hand over to Andrew. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thanks very much. And Lara, come and join me as well. Lara, I didn't really know until this afternoon, although she's a good friend of my mum, so it's been very nice to get to know her, and we're going to kind of all get to know her in a moment. The topic of tonight is about suffering and hope in the face of suffering, and we're going to hear Lara's story over the next half an hour or so. It is quite a traumatic story at points, and I just want to say at the beginning, as we talk about mental health and some even more difficult things a bit later on. It might be there's people here who find these things difficult. It might be that some of the things that Lara shares are a kind of trigger for particular painful memories or things you're still working through. And if that is the case, we'd love to invite you to talk to Lara or myself or someone else from the church here, or maybe there's a friend you need to get in touch with or talk to your GP or whatever. But don't be surprised if hearing these things upsets you more than right now you think it's going to, just as a warning. But we're going to start before things got difficult, and we're going to start right in your childhood when you were born as a vicar's daughter or Methodist minister's daughter. And lots of people here maybe are thinking, well, of course, that's how you become a Christian, isn't it? If you're born into a religious family, then you're religious. If you're born into a Methodist minister's family, you must have grown up as the perfect Christian little girl.
Definitely not. No, exactly. So, I was born in Liverpool, actually. The Methodist church, the ministers move around generally every 5 years. So I was born in Liverpool, and then I moved to Bristol. Then
Do you support the team where you grew up?
I do. I am, because actually I was a Scouser. I am a Scouser, technically, which means that I did have a very strong Liverpudlian accent. But when I moved to Bristol, I had to lose that accent, or I'd be beaten up. So, but I do support the COP now. Yeah, I do. I mean, not avidly, but if I support any team, it's
Great. And you said you kind of grew up in a Christian home, lived as a normal child. You then get an opportunity to go to boarding school on a scholarship. And for the first time, you escaped the control of your parents. You went to Bath, and you sort of spread your wings a bit and didn't live quite the same Christian life.
No, I think if anyone else is here is a vicar's daughter or a vicar's child or a mish kid or anything, you've grown up in the church, especially if your father has got that position of responsibility, you do become sort of a bit of a stereotyped child, and you are expected to behave yourself. And just like any normal kid, I wasn't especially naughty, but it was a great thing for me to be able to go to Bath to it was a Methodist foundation school called Kingswood, which is a sister school of the Lees, actually, which is here in Cambridge. And I went there for 2 years, and there were lots of other ministers' kids there who were equally as naughty and cheeky. So you could get up to all sorts of nonsense. But also it was great to do that.
And it was when you were on your gap year, so you went to somewhere in
Bolivia.
Central America,
I went to,
Bolivia. Yeah. And you told me that was a bit of a turning point in your own journey to faith.
Yeah, so my parents, both Christians, obviously, and I'd always grown up in church, went to church every week, and I saw what Christian service was like. My parents were often looking after people maybe who were homeless or had mental health issues or what have you. And then, so I went away to Bolivia, and it was a Christian organisation that was doing some building work with local Christians there in Bolivia, and there was a group of 12 of us who'd been taken from all different denominations, all different churches around the UK, and it was a really it was a real bonding time actually, but it opened my eyes a lot to how I hadn't really studied the Bible at all. And I'd heard, obviously, sermons every week since when I was little, but actually I hadn't appreciated the importance of my own faith becoming sort of real, if you like, and not just an extension of my parents' faith. And it was while I was there that a good friend of mine, who I'm still really good friends with, she explained to me a little booklet, actually. It's called The 2 Ways to Live. And it was explaining how we are born on this earth and we have a choice, basically, whether to follow Christ and live under his rule or not to. And she explained it to me. And I was like, yeah, I believe that. But it was over sort of subsequent months and things through just starting to study the Bible that, my faith I became more committed.
You told me that, and we're looking this weekend at this little booklet. So this is one of the biographies of Jesus' life, John's Gospel. Apparently when you were in Bolivia, you had a kind of devotional each evening, so someone would take a bit of the Bible and explain it, and you'd sort of pray and sing. And there was one thing in John's Gospel you said really stuck out to you.
Yeah, it was where Jesus said, "I am the vine, and you are the branches." And there's a whole passage there just talking about how if we cling to God and recognize Christ for who He is, that He has us safely in the palm of His hand, and. This was, 30 years ago, back in the days before sort of social media, before computers were sort of in everyone's houses, before mobile phones, anything like that. And there was something about being basically with this group of 12 Christians, pretty much on the other side of the world, and without any other sort of influences for me, that it really helped to have that time to talk with my peers about what that meant. And we were all from differing churches and had slightly different ideas, but the basic premise was there that Christ died for us and that we could trust him if we put our trust in him and trusted him as Lord.
So you grew up in a church family, kind of made it your own as a teenager, and then sort of fast forward a bit, you did a degree in music and politics, yeah. Because they were your two favourite things.
Yeah, I know. My brother, who's a lawyer and earned lots of money, he scathingly says, "Oh, that's such a vocational degree, Lara." But it was just the two subjects that I really enjoyed. I took them for A-level. And I was at Oxford Poly when it was Oxford Poly, which is now Oxford Bricks. And I just really enjoyed both those subjects.
And then you went off to Kenya.
Yes.
So your love of travelling, and you were teaching there for a bit in a poor school. And then, basically, cut a long story short, you ended up in Cambridge.
Yep.
And you were in a Bible study at the church here.
Yep.
And tell us about your experience as a musician in a Cambridge kind of Bible study.
Yeah, well, bless you. I'd come along to church here, and here we're very, very fortunate. There's a lot of students that come to this church, as well as families and everything. But I'd come along, and there's a regular Bible study group for students, and also for people in their 20s and 30s. And I'd come along, and I was in the music group, and there was all sorts of undergraduates and what have you, and then because I was doing a PGCE, or I was doing teacher training to teach music, There was another guy called Johnny here, and he was doing his PGCE, about to take classics, or learning how to teach classics. And they put us two with a bunch of really, really, really clever PhD students. Often, most of them were really, I say geeky in a really sort of affectionate way, but they were all really deep thinkers. And John and I sort of, when our Bible study leaders would ask a question about the passage, they'd all be really thinking about it really hard, really quiet and everything. And because I'm quite garrulous, I just said the first thing that came into my head because I quite like a debate. And then Johnny sort of felt sorry, so he would say something else, but all the others were still thinking about the answer. So yeah, that's how we met. Rather how I met Johnny, who became my husband. And
you say he became your husband, but it's a bit different than that because apparently you gave him what he referred to as the Gestapo interview.
Yeah, I know. I was 24 at the time, and we went to Brown's, which is a lovely restaurant here in Cambridge, and I gave him an absolute grilling because as a sort of committed Christian, basically, I wanted to know what he thought about loads of theological things, and so I just fired. It wasn't romantic at all. I just fired loads of questions at him, and but still, yeah, he wasn't scared off. So that was good. He passed. Yeah, exactly.
You got married.
Yeah, we did. We got married. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then the first sign of sort of difficult things ahead was in training to be a minister himself.
Yeah.
And he began the process in the Church of England to be sort of selected. And the person in charge of the process said really unexpectedly, you should go and see a psychotherapist.
Yeah. So we were working here as musical directors for the church at the time. And there's a process in the Church of England which you have to go through in order to apply to become a vicar, to go to Vicar Factory. And basically, it's a person who obviously checks you out and just sort of talks about things and sees if you're suitable. But the DDO, he was called, said he ought to see a psychotherapist. And this was really, really out of the blue. We'd been married for about 5 years by then. And it was just really strange. I couldn't understand it. And so he did. He went to, we finished the work here, and we moved to Histon, where we still live. And he had a few psychotherapy sessions. But after those, he started to get very, very anxious. And he'd only had about 2 or 3 sessions. And he just really started to lose the plot, basically. And he woke up and was not sleeping. And it got to the point where went to the GP. Got no history of mental illness or anything like that. But to cut a long story short, he just started babbling about demons and just possession and all sorts of things. And at the time, I'd got my nearly 3-year-old and 1.5-year-old, and I was pregnant at the time with another one. And it just got a very difficult situation. And to cut a long story short, I had to ring the police in the night because he said he couldn't guarantee that I would be safe. And
let's just sort of slow down. So it's basically you'd been married for 5 years, been totally fine. And then over the period of just 3 weeks, he starts to act differently and strangely. And then you get to the point one night that you're so scared and you think that you call 999 about your husband. I mean, it's frightening.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's totally surreal. And even me repeating it now, it just feels ridiculous. But it was really that quick and that brutal. And Johnny was 6'6". He was a big man. I'd always said my previous boyfriend was too short, so I just got rid of him. Of course, that's big facetious. But he was a very big man. And, he was my husband. I loved him. We got married. And I was scared. And Johnny was a very gentle giant. There are people here that remember him. And he was very, very gentle, very committed Christian. but he'd lost his mind, and it was terrifying. So yeah, I had to ring the police middle of the night. I remember police came around, and I was breastfeeding my youngest, and basically we had 3 ambulance men, 2 police officers, and a doctor. And for those,
So they must have. I mean, when you phone 999, I always think it's police, fire, or ambulance. But you explained, and they just clocked. This is mental health crisis.
Yeah, I mean, again, and this is where I'm very, very aware that there'll be people in this room that have maybe had similar issues with relatives or friends, and just the pressure on the mental health system now is absolutely at breaking point. And we were very fortunate that the police came over, because and you know, any of you with friends who work in the police or relatives will know that the police do spend an awful lot of time dealing with mental health crises of largely men who are potentially about to be violent with their partners or what have you. And personally, I feel that shouldn't be their first remit, but that's the way it is. And so yeah, that you ring up and you know, I just said, look, my husband's really unwell and I've got 2 little children and I don't feel safe. And bless their hearts, they came round. And they basically took him away in the back of a police car. And he didn't have to be sectioned. Sectioning, I'm sure most of you know, is when you're deemed incapable of looking after yourself, in terms of you might be a threat to somebody else or yourself, life-threatening. So he wasn't sectioned because he went of his own will, so he agreed to go with them. And basically he just ended up in 𝘸𝘯𝘦, which is the local psychiatric unit, for 2 months. Yeah.
So, happily married 5 years, 3 weeks husband behaving strangely, and then 2 months on your own, and you're pregnant, and your eldest child is beginning to have some mental health issues of her own. So this is a really, really stressful time. And I guess a time when your faith is tested. So you believe in Jesus and you trust him, and then suddenly, is this going to make a difference in a crisis? And you told me when we were discussing earlier that it was so confusing and your head was all over the place. It was very difficult to pray back then. But one thing that was a real lifeline to you was God's people in the church. Now, maybe some people think church is just a thing you go to on a Sunday or, you know, on a Saturday evening after the FA Cup final. Hello. But what was the church to you in that really difficult time?
It was, you know, unbelievably amazing. I mean, basically, if any of you have been in a crisis situation like that, if you're a parent, your immediate priority is your children. And to be honest, it was such a whirlwind what had happened that my focus was on my kids. But the church were absolutely amazing. I basically had people bringing me food every other day for 6 weeks. For 6 weeks, you know. I mean, and these people, we don't all live in the same village. They're bringing it from the other side of town. And I can still remember the conversations I had with people when they come over. I remember Carolyn Ash, who's here. I can remember, you know, her writing a lovely, lovely card to me from 20 years ago. And I can remember pretty much what she wrote on that card. It meant huge things. But also people were praying. They were I couldn't really, my brain was so scrambled because I was just trying to deal with things, but also then I started to miscarry, so I lost that one, and at 12 weeks it was all a bit pants really. And I remember there was a couple from the church who'd come, so I'd started bleeding, and so I ended up going to Addenbrooke's, and they said, do you want a D&C, which is they clear you out? And I said, no, it's okay, I'll just go back because I need to look after the kids and all that sort of stuff. And there were these lovely ladies from the church who'd came and looked after the 2 kids, and I remember just past the tiny fetus in the night in the loo, and I just got up and got on with it. So basically my brain was just like all a bit scrambled, but we were just held in prayer all that time, and just very practical help from people. There was one lady that used to come and play with my eldest child, and she never asked me any questions about Johnny, anything that was going on. She just played with my eldest child, and it just meant I wasn't having to keep explaining myself and everything like that all the time. So it was just, you know what, it was just a huge blessing.
A real family to you at that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then Johnny gets discharged or he gets released 2 months later, that's also difficult for you, right? Because you've now got to welcome back your husband that you thought you knew, and now what's going on? How did you feel then?
Yeah, that was almost worse. I know that's pathetic to say that, but basically, if you're married, you just think, how am I going to sleep with this person, let alone sleep next to this person? Because this is a person who I've committed to love in front of God throughout my life. And yeah, I was at a point where I was physically scared of him, and I don't really quite know who he is, because he sounds like he's lost his marbles, and he's now very vulnerable. And when I'd met Johnny, he just like overachieved at everything, and just sort of life was fairly easy for him. And I just thought, how's this going to work? And he didn't have a job because the Church of England then said no, which was quite right and proper, because obviously if you're a clergy person, you need to deal with some pretty stressful things on a daily basis. So yeah, it was tricky, but he got a job locally here at the music shop. And Johnny was a very bright man. He was sort of went to Trinity, Oxford, and read classics, and a lot of his peers are all kind of running the country, literally, and finding cures for cancer, and head teachers, and blah blah. But he was on minimum wage working at the music shop. But he was much happier like that, actually, because it gave him chance to get involved in different things here at church, and music, and Bible study groups for men, and things like that.
And we're going to sort of fast forward, but it's important to say that the next 19 years of your life were normal and pretty happy, and little ups and downs, but on the whole, Johnny was healthy.
Yeah.
You had a happy marriage.
Yeah, I mean, I was diagnosed with depression 11 years ago. I think a combination of having a child with special needs, also just I'd relinquished my role as an earner because I was a carer for my eldest child, and it was just kind of how life wasn't what I expected it to be. Do you know what I mean? When I got married to Johnny, he's very high achieving, and suddenly we were kind of, on a pretty low wage. We lived in quite a small house, and actually I was struggling slightly with my 3 kids.
And then 19 years later, and I'm just going to set a bit of the scene. So your oldest daughter is about to go to Japan.
Yeah.
As a year abroad as part of her degree.
Yeah.
And at just that point, when you're just getting ready, Johnny starts to feel a bit unwell.
Yeah. I mean, he'd had a period. His father had died 5 years ago, and he'd gone on to antidepressants for a while then, which is very common. And people. I especially feel for blokes with mental health issues, because there's a lot through COVID. Obviously, it's been to the fore, but it's often quite hard for blokes, I think, to admit that when they're struggling. But basically, he started to become quite obsessed about some things in the news, which were quite distressing, and he just started to show lots of sign of anxiety again. And
in your head, you're remembering 20 years previously.
Yeah.
So it's
So, sent him to the GP. I mean, by this time, I'd spoken to his mum and everything, and he just went downhill fairly quickly again. I spoke to his boss sort of behind his back. I just said, I'm quite worried about Johnny. He's not sleeping and he's quite anxious. And he got to the point where when if I asked him a question, he'd want to write it down before he answered it, and just really bizarre things like this. And so I said to his boss this, and he said, "Oh, thank goodness, because I was about to ring you," because he'd been having a long conversation about fractals for 30 minutes with Johnny, and his boss hadn't got a clue what he was going on about.
Which in Cambridge is not that unusual,
No,
right?
it's not, exactly. I don't understand fractals, but yeah, Johnny did. So, yeah.
So, and you're at this point, you're starting to really worry because you remember how ill he'd been previously.
Yeah.
And I think it's a serious story, but a bit of light relief. You told me a funny story about a couple of people who are sitting in the front row here, who rushed to try and help you.
Yeah, exactly. Dear Kate and Chris, who we've known for a long time. I mean, I shouldn't remind poor Chris about this, but to cut a long story short, I booked an appointment at the GP because I said my husband's really ill, having a mental health episode, and bless them, Kate and Chris were driving back from Edinburgh, and poor Chris had a dodgy samosa, so he wasn't feeling great. But out of the kindness of their hearts, they drove back from Edinburgh. They met me at my doctor's car park. Poor Chris was still feeling poorly, but Kate, who's a GP here, she came in with me because we'd been to and fro from A&E for the previous days. I'd taken him in, but they kept sending him back because they're absolutely up to their eyeballs. All psychiatric stuff is up to their eyeballs. And Kate came in with me and basically saw the GP. Then we went back to A&E, and thankfully he was sectioned that time. Yeah.
So he's back in Fulbourn.
Yep.
3 weeks.
Yep.
Meanwhile, you then go to Japan with your
Yes.
oldest daughter.
So my eldest reading Japanese, and I'd gone out to Japan to settle her in with another member of this church family, Sue, and it was tricky, but
he's released while you're in Japan.
He's released while I'm in Japan.
His parents pick him up. And
his
look
mum
after
picks him up. Yeah, and it was quite stressful because I was trying to sort of help my daughter, the other side of the world, but I knew my husband was pretty unwell, and but I came back, and he was in for 3 weeks, and then he came out, and it was Christmas. Yeah.
And then the story gets even more difficult. So he's back for a bit.
Yeah.
And then he has to go back into hospital.
Yeah, I came back. I had to go back out to Japan because my daughter was slightly struggling in Japan. So I went to Japan again, and I came back. And by the time I got back, he was just in a really bad way. And my youngest daughter was just living with him and had told me some things that had been difficult. And I'm afraid it was another... basically, I woke up on Saturday morning, Saturday morning, and he'd locked himself in the downstairs toilet, and he wasn't making any sense, and he was basically talking about ending his life, and so I had to call the first responders. It's just a system that you get into, and then he went off and started trying to throw himself under cars, so I could ring the police basically at that point, and they came and they took him. Again, sectioned him. Well, they took him in, and then he was sectioned again.
And then this is the sort of most shocking and horrible part of the story. So 1 week later, he's been in Fulbourn. Following Saturday, you get a phone call.
Yeah, I got a phone call following Saturday at 1:00, and it was from the head of the trust, basically saying that Johnny had died, and they weren't quite sure why and how. But he died at 9:30 that morning, and could I come in basically and view him and everything? So it was just like such a shock. I had no idea, it was just a huge shock. And my parents were up, and my daughter was there, and I was just like, if any of you have been in that situation, it's just crap. It's just rubbish. You just can't believe it. It feels like you're in a dream. And the trouble is, my daughter was in Japan, and I didn't. The complication was I could let my prayer group know, my close friends at church, but I couldn't let the word get out because I needed to tell my daughter over in Japan. And so I got a neighbour opposite who used to be a paramedic, and I just went over, and I was just in shock, and I said, right, I don't know what to do. So I just went in with my daughter, and he took me in, and we viewed him, and it was a ghastly situation. He was, the nurses were very shocked. They didn't know. They just couldn't wake him properly in the morning, and they tried CPR on him, and then they called the head of the trust, and it had taken 3.5 hours basically to ring me afterwards. Clearly, it was a difficult thing. So the difficulty then was trying to just tell my daughter.
And then you were in a really difficult situation because
Yeah.
she was at university in Japan,
Yeah.
and the Japanese university didn't allow you to tell her what had happened.
No, I wasn't allowed to. I mean, this is no offense to anyone who's Japanese here or whatever, but Japan's a wonderful country and so safe and everything, but I think sort of not great necessarily on emotions and being able to and sort of things like this, but I was not allowed. She said I spoke to her tutor, and we had conversations through the night, just trying to say, but she said you can't tell her that.
Because I guess they were worried it'd be a suicide risk for her. How was she reacting?
Yeah, which is understandable. So bless her, I had to, basically I rang, I texted my daughter, so I need to ring, and I spoke to her and I said, we've booked your plane ticket and you need to, so it was 8 o'clock at night and you've got a plane 7 o'clock the next morning and you've got to get on that plane. And I mean, bless her heart, she was 21, she struggles with sorts of things anyway, and it was an utter miracle she got on that airplane. I mean, Kate will remember the praying that we were doing. And she came home, and then we told her at the airport, and Kate came with me. It was horrific. She was very, very upset, but also very angry that not to tell her. But it's just how it is.
And then there was a funeral here, and the building was.
Yeah.
It's probably the last time almost the white building was packed before we all got locked down. So we're just before the lockdown now.
Yeah.
Massive funeral. 1.5 years later, you get the inquest.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the coroner concludes that Johnny died of a blood clot.
Yeah.
What I just want to sort of step. I mean, it's some people are just thinking this is a horrific story. You've not heard it before. I just want to pray, like, what difference it's made to be a Christian in this. And one thing you told me I thought was really striking this afternoon was your reaction to the inquest, because you said a lot of people, you want to blame somebody and it wasn't directly the hospital's fault, but could they have done something else and etc. But you said you had a very different attitude to it because of being a Christian.
Yeah, I mean, as a Christian, I believe that God has his hand over our lives, that the world is not as he originally made it. It's broken, which is evident in pretty much every relationship we have, every illness, abuse, what have you. But Johnny was a very strong Christian, and I'm very grateful that I trusted that God has his hands over the situation, and that there's several passages in the Bible. But there's a passage in 1 Thessalonians 5 where it talks about the dead will be raised with him, and they will be basically in heaven with Jesus forever. And Johnny was in huge emotional torment, mental torment, before he died. I mean, he was only 47, so it was not, and it was a huge shock, and it was awful, it was ghastly. But I believe he's with Christ now. And so there's no point in blaming anyone. And what is the point in blaming anyone? Because my life is with Christ, and Johnny's life is with Christ. And, as a Christian, my love, in fact, for, the nurses, I take my hat off to psychiatric nurses, let alone nurses, just because of what they cope with every day in a very, very overwhelmed system. But I have that peace in my heart that he's with Christ. And, so what's the point of quibbling about anything now? We just take our life from where it is now. And so, it was a long time to wait for the inquest. And, I cried my eyes out through it, and it's all ghastly. And, in an inquest, they had 2 files like this of every single thing that any nurse had written about him, and all the gritty detail about how ill he was at the end, and out of his mind he was. And it's ghastly reading. I shredded them afterwards because it was so horrible, because, it was just a grim thing. But I have hope that, I'll see him again.
Thanks for being so open, Lara. You told me earlier about a favourite verse of yours from the Psalms. Do you want to finish with just showing that to us? A verse that's been very precious from the Bible to you.
Yeah, so Psalm 91, 1, he who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. And especially when Johnny dies, I, as a musician, there's lots of lovely settings of that to music. But it just reassured me totally that God has a bigger purpose for us. He has got despite what hideous, crappy things which happen to us, and each one of us will have a situation like that, he loves us, and this life is not all there is, and there is much better life ahead. So I really, I value that verse and everything. So even as a person who, I can't spout 8,000 Bible verses at you, but I know in my heart that his word is true.
Lara, thanks so much. As you can see, Lara's very open, and I know she's really willing to be open with anyone here. So if there's things you want to talk about your own experiences or ask her more, she'll be around at the end. She'd love to chat. But should we give her a round of applause for all she shared? The title for this evening is Better Hope. And I kind of love everything about this title. I'm not going to spend ages on it, but I love the fact that it's about hope rather than about saying this world's brilliant. I used to think, Christians just blind to reality. They just go through the world with a big smile fixed on their faces because they just don't realize how much suffering and evil there is in the world. And I'm really pleased that we started the evening the way we have, hearing such an honest story, because Christians aren't pretending that the world's okay. And the Bible doesn't pretend the world's okay. It's full of heart-wrenching questions, actually voiced to God. Lord, why is it like this? And as you look through the Bible, you'll find that question being asked a lot. Lord, why is there injustice like this in the world? You think Ukraine and Russia. Why? Why is there suffering like this in the world that doesn't make sense? And the Bible isn't in some sort of fairy tale universe where it pretends things are okay. In fact, the Bible's really honest that the world is very, very not okay. And so this talk tonight is about hope. It's not about, is the world fine now? No. But what hope is there? What answer is there given that the world's a mess? It's about that. The other thing I love about the title is it's about better hope, which is actually asking us to compare, I think. Now, I don't think that the Bible, that Jesus has answers to every question we have about suffering. And I'm pleased that we're allowed to ask why and be honest with God, and it doesn't all make sense now. But I do think, I'm really persuaded that the Bible has much better answers than the other options. And so if you come here, I don't know what your background, I guess there'll be a whole mixture of backgrounds, but I want to invite you not just to ask the question, can Jesus answer every question I've got, but what's Jesus' answer and how does it compare with the other answers? You've got to do a sort of comparative test. I remember when I was a skeptic when I first came to Cambridge, and agnostic, sort of atheist, and I found it easy to throw stones at Christians. And you know the clever philosophical arguments. If God were all powerful, he would be able to end suffering. If God were all loving, he'd want to end suffering. But here we are in a world with suffering, so an all-powerful, all-loving God doesn't exist. QED. And the philosopher sits back in her armchair and waits for the Christian to squirm. We can all play that kind of game, but I want to ask us sort of comparatively, well, what other answers are there? So I was an atheist, I guess. I thought that I was here by chance, that all of us are here by chance. What does the atheist say to suffering? Well, it's just meaningless, isn't it? It's just random. I mean, everything's random. We're here as the product of a purposeless biological process that didn't have us in mind. It doesn't make sense to ask random numbers why. It's not an answer. That's all you can say. Is Richard Dawkins famously said, now it's an oft-repeated quote, in a world of blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky and you won't find any rhyme or reason to it or any justice. The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no good, no evil, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. I mean, it's well put. It's a shocking philosophy. Everything's random. Everything's meaningless. So why ask why? That's as far as you can get as the atheists. And I thought that was not a good answer. Then you have the answer of the Hindu. In fact, earlier this afternoon, I was interviewing a member of this church who had grown up as a Hindu. He's a cancer doctor at Adam Brooks. And he was explaining that within Hinduism, this principle of karma, it's basically the principle of payback. So if you're suffering, it's because you deserved it. Either you in this life deserved it, or some previous you in a previous cycle of reincarnation deserved it. And so you walk past someone in a cancer ward and you say, well, you got what's coming. I mean, it wouldn't put it as crassly as that, but that is the philosophy of millions of people in the world. Karma, payback. You get what you deserve. That's not a very satisfying answer. Or Buddhism, a philosophy that really came about because Buddha was wrestling with the problem of suffering. He came to the insight that we suffer because we care about things. We care about our own life and we care about other people. We form attachments. And it would hurt less if we could only detach ourselves. If we could break the connections between ourselves and other people, we'd be protected from suffering. A few years ago, somebody that I love very much was in a relationship that broke down. She was living at the time in Hawaii, and the relationship was a wreck, and she basically just got to the airport, caught the first plane she could out of Hawaii, left her whole livelihood behind, got to San Francisco, phoned me in the middle of the night. And she was very upset, and I was very upset, because I really care about this person. And the philosophy of Buddhism would say, well, the solution is, if only I'd cared a little bit less about this friend, and she'd cared a little bit less about her relationship, if only we could detach somehow, then it wouldn't hurt as much. And sure, that's probably true, it wouldn't hurt as much. But to say, stop caring about the person, it's too high a price to pay, to my mind. I don't think that's a good answer. In Islam, suffering is the will of Allah. All that happens is the will of Allah. You can't question the will of Allah. It's not a very good answer, I don't think. So not does Jesus answer everything, but is the hope that Jesus gives a better hope? And I really think that it is. What we're going to do tonight, in fact, what we've done all this weekend, and if you've missed previous talks and you're interested, you can catch them all on the YouTube channel for this church, on the Something Better website. But what we've been doing each time is looking at this biography of Jesus. It's a first century biography written by a friend of Jesus who was a fisherman, written in Greek, translated into English. And this is yours to take home. And I'd love if you could grab it now. It should be on your seat with the pink writing. And we're going to look at a chapter of it together. This is an episode in the life of Jesus where he encountered suffering. And I don't want to kind of keep repeating myself. I said on Friday that Jesus was very surprising when he went to a wedding. But I want to say the same thing again. I think Jesus' actions are very surprising when he goes to a funeral. And there's all sorts of things about what happened here that I think will just are not what you would expect, put it that way. And I hope that will intrigue us and will lead us into what he has to say. So we're on chapter 11, page 28, and I'd love if you followed along with me. We're going to see a few things here. A man named Lazarus was ill. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay ill, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. That refers to another episode that we read of later. Here's a woman who loves Jesus very much, and she pours out perfume on his feet just before Jesus dies. You know, she really loves him. Anyway, it turns out that this woman's brother is very ill. So it's someone close to Jesus and very seriously ill. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, Jesus, Lord, the one you love is ill. When Jesus heard this, Jesus said, the illness will not end in death. No, it's for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed where he was for 2 more days. Then he said to his disciples, let's go back to Judea. Now, I think this is the first very surprising thing about this episode. If you heard news, someone you love is very, very severely ill, what do? Well, you drop everything. You immediately go and see them. You don't know how long they've got left. I was talking to a friend recently who just managed to get there in time to say goodbye to his mother before she died. You immediately rush to the bedside. Jesus doesn't. In fact, when he hears that Lazarus is ill, he deliberately does not go for 2 days. Why? In fact, it's even more surprising because we read in verse 5, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, so he waited 2 days. Well, why is it loving to delay going to the bedside of this very sick man? Okay, we'll come to this again later. Very, very curious. The disciples are surprised. Rabbi, they say, a short while ago, the Jews in Judea tried to stone you. You want to go back there? Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. It's when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light. After he'd said this, he went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up. His disciples replied, Lord, if he's asleep, he'll get better. Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. Now, this talk of someone who's dead being asleep, it's kind of a weird way to talk about it, right? I mean, it's no wonder that they don't understand. Jesus says he's asleep, and he means he's dead. It's actually the way that Christians came to talk about death on account of this episode. So we call places where we bury dead people cemeteries, and I don't know my ancient Latin and Greek as well as some of you do, as well as Lara's husband does, but a cemetery, I think from the Latin, it means a dormitory. It means a place where you sleep. Very, very weird way to describe a graveyard, isn't it? If you're an atheist, you'd say you call it a rotting place or a decomposing place. But because British culture has been shaped by the Christian message, we call it a sleeping place. Because according to Jesus, dead people are just asleep and can be woken up by him. Very surprising. Verse 14, he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I'm glad that I was not there, so that you may believe. Now, here is the solution to the first puzzle, right? We're asking, how come Jesus delays? And here's the answer. He wants to leave enough time for Lazarus to be properly dead so that he can do something to help our faith. I'm glad that I wasn't there because I want to help your faith, he says. You know, what is going to happen in this man Lazarus' life that is going to help their faith? Well, let's read on. Thomas, known as Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, let's go that we can die with him. Thomas is something of a pessimist. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now, Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. What do you think is the tone of that? It could be grief and sadness. Lord, I wish you'd been here. You know, you've done all these miracles. I wish you'd been here. You'd have known what to do when the doctors couldn't help. It could be that. It could be anger. Lord, where were you? What did you mean by staying behind for 2 more days? If you'd only been here, Jesus. And I love that the Bible is just so realistic about death, isn't it? It's not this sort of, because they're Christians, they all have halos and they all smile all the time. I mean, this is how people react to this kind of news. It's just, it doesn't make sense, Jesus. If only you'd been here, Jesus. but even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask. And Jesus says straight away, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he'll rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Now, this is just standard Jewish belief, right? So Jews weren't atheists. They believe in a God. He's the creator. They also believe in a resurrection day. So the belief of all Jews is that in the future, one day, everyone who's ever lived, anyone who's ever died, will be raised from the dead, and there'll be a great day of judgment, and God will decide our eternal future. So Martha, she's a Jewish believer. She believes that. That's the standard thing. Yeah, I know in the future, at some point, there'll be some sort of end-of-the-world day when my brother, along with everyone else, will rise. And Jesus has something more to say. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. Whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she replied. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who was to come into the world. After she said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher's here, she said, and is asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now, Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who'd been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. Both sisters, they feel the same about this. When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. If you're in a pub quiz and you get to the religious round, one of the favorite pub quiz religious questions is, what is the shortest verse in the Bible? And the bit of trivia for free is it's John chapter 11, verse 35. 2 words. Jesus wept. It's good for a pub quiz. It also tells us something profound, doesn't it, about Jesus? Jesus isn't the detached deity, the chess player who just moves the pieces around the board and sits indifferently to our suffering. Jesus cares about it. Jesus is upset by it. And Jesus wept at it. If you heard Lara's story today, I've heard it twice. I heard it earlier on and had a bit of a chance to process it. If you've heard it and it deeply upset you, then be comforted that it deeply upsets God. These kind of things. Something is wrong with the world when death has entered. It's not the world that God originally made, and Lara hinted at this already. The Bible says that God made a perfect, a beautiful world. But it went horribly wrong when human beings decided to turn our backs on our Creator and to set off in rebellion without him. It's what the Bible calls sin, and that sounds maybe like an old-fashioned word in our culture. But the Bible says that this is the thing that has just wrecked everything. It wrecks human relationships. It wrecks the environment, all the extinction, rebellion sort of worries and about that in the future. It wrecks nations, and we just read the newspapers and you see that. It wrecks our relationship with the God who loves us and wants to know us. And death is a result of this great tragedy, and it upsets Jesus. He's not cool and indifferent to it. He weeps at it. But some of them said, couldn't the one who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? A miracle that from the previous chapter. You know, if Jesus has supernatural power, he ought to be able to stop things like this. This is the philosopher, isn't it? If God were all-powerful, he would be able to stop suffering. Couldn't he have stopped suffering? Where was he? They say. Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there's a bad odor, for he's been there 4 days. Now, again, I think this is really interesting because when she's asked, do you believe in the resurrection? She goes, yeah. But when she's at the graveside and Jesus says, okay, go on then, let's open the grave up, she's not so sure about it. And I think that's interesting, isn't it? Because there is a kind of, a kind of instinct Christian belief that says, yeah, I believe those things. Do you believe there's a God? Yes, tick. Do you believe that Jesus the Christ? Yes. It kind of comes easily to us because maybe it's part of our culture or upbringing, part of being a Methodist minister's daughter. You can kind of say yes in theory to that. But then when you actually stare death in the face, it's a different matter. Okay, then says Jesus, open up the tomb. And she doesn't know what to say. Jesus, it's 4 days since he died. We're in the Middle East here. It's pretty hot. He'll be decomposing. Are you sure you want me to do this? And Jesus says, didn't I tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. You've got to be pretty sure, haven't you, before you do this? I mean, if Jesus is just some sort of gimmicky teacher, then this is worse than irresponsible. I mean, this is an evil thing to do. To say to two grieving sisters, let's open the grave of your dead brother, just for a sort of religious illustration. You've got to be pretty sure of yourself. And Jesus is sure of himself. Verse 41, they took away the stone. Jesus looked up and said, Father, he's praying to God in heaven, his Father, didn't I thank you? You've heard me. I know you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. When he said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen, a cloth round his face. And sorry to bring a light note, but I cannot but think of Scooby-Doo at this point. So if some of you know what I mean, the cartoon. He comes out looking like the mummy from Scooby-Doo. So all of the grave clothes wrapped around him, like this. But he was dead, and now he's not, and that is the surprise. Jesus said to them, take off the grave clothes and let him go. Now, this is a very important episode in the life of Jesus. Because it's one thing, isn't it, to wishfully tell yourself the fantasy story that there'll be a heaven and everything will be okay. And it's another thing to have actual evidence that it's going to be okay. And what Jesus gives us in his life and his teaching is not just lovely ideas about there being a better hope, but he gives us a concrete eyewitness demonstration in history that he can bring about the better hope. And some of you might have heard of Rico Tice, or some Christians will have heard of Rico Tice. He's a well-known Christian speaker in this country, and he's a huge rugby player, and I think he used to play forward or something for rugby. And anyway, he tells this story, and I'm going to borrow his story because I think it's so good, of being at school facing the injection, the immunization injection. So in my day, it was called the BCG, I think, and then it's the MMR, that whatever it was, that cocktail of vaccines that we had when we were children. And Rico, even though he's a big rugby player, is terrified of needles. And he was in the queue waiting for the nurse's office and sweating profusely. And he thought he was trying to calm himself down. He's saying, be rational, Rico, be rational. He decided that what he would do is watch the person in front of him in the queue and see what happened to them. So in front of him is some weedy little kid, let's call him Andrew. And they were sort of shuffling along, and Andrew goes into the nurse's office, and the door closes. And Rico said, I listened very carefully. I could hear no blood-curdling screams from inside the nurse's office. I thought, this is a good sign. He said, I looked downwards at the door. I could see no pool of blood seeping under the door. I thought, this is a good sign. But he said the clincher was when the door opened, and weedy little Andrew comes out with a small little plaster on his arm, smiling. And Rico says to himself, if he can get through this, I can get through this. It's a silly illustration, it's just an injection. But it's good logic, isn't it? If there's precedent for surviving this vaccination, I can survive it. Well, it's like that, but with death. If someone just tells you, oh, don't worry about death because, well, as Lara said, you'll see him again. Is that just a sort of platitude, a Christian saying what she wants to hear? It's not enough just to fantasize about a solution. But what if the Jesus who promises that he's the resurrection and the life has already demonstrated that? What if somebody ahead of us in the queue died and then was raised in front of his sisters and all the people in the village and all the eyewitnesses? And of course, the story of Lazarus' resurrection is then mirrored and matched by the story of Jesus' own resurrection. You keep reading in this book, you'd find that Jesus he dies of crucifixion, as you know. And 3 days later, the tomb's empty, and they meet him, and he proves it, and doubting Thomas can't quite believe it until he examines the execution scars himself. And God is not asking us to believe something that would be nice, just as a matter of blind faith. He's asking us to believe in something that has been demonstrated. Faith, the word faith, it just means to trust something. And if you're a rational, sensible person, then you trust things that are trustworthy, that have you got reasons to trust. And the Bible, I think, never asks you to believe anything without giving you reasons for doing so. And here the reason is believe in the resurrection because there was a resurrection. Believe that Jesus can get you through death because he got Lazarus through death. He himself got through death. There's one other little puzzle, though, and this actually puzzled me for years. I'm a pastor, and part of my job is explaining passages like this, and it's one of my favourite episodes. In fact, I read this passage at my grandma's funeral. I managed just about to get through the reading, and before I was overcome with emotion. But it's always puzzled me, and this is the puzzle. I've already said about it, actually, that Jesus wept. He was very upset at this funeral. And you kind of think, yeah, that shows Jesus' compassion. It shows he cares, and just like I said this evening. But here was the puzzle for me. But Jesus, you know that you're God and that you're just about to raise him from the dead. Okay, so I would be sad, and last year I went to the funeral this year earlier, of a very close friend who died of a brain tumor at age 53. And as I saw his teenage children carrying in the coffin, I couldn't hold it together. I understand the grief of death. It's a horrible thing. But if I knew that a couple of hours later I was going to resurrect Alan, I don't think I would be so sad, right? This is temporary. I can fix this. I get that we're sad, but for Jesus to be sad, he knows he can fix it. Why is he so sad? It's a puzzle for me. In fact, we read that Jesus was deeply moved in his spirit and troubled at it. I think this is the answer. This is the thing that about a year ago I read actually a scholar from Cambridge explaining this, and I thought that makes absolute sense. A couple of chapters later, or a chapter later rather, Jesus starts to talk about his own death. And he uses very, very similar words. He says that Jesus is very troubled and moved about it. And talks about the time when he'll be lifted up for the salvation of the world. The same language, he was deeply troubled. He was deeply moved. And I thought about that. This is kind of close connection. Jesus is feeling the same emotion about Lazarus' death as about his own. A couple more bits of the jigsaw. It turns out actually that Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead is the absolute last straw for his enemies. So Jesus has been saying very difficult things, and the religious people in particular can't bear it. He's too radical. He's too uncomfortable. They start to plot to kill him quite early on in the accounts. But when he raises Lazarus from the dead, this is the last straw. Because basically they realize they can't stop Jesus. If he's going to start doing resurrections, then everyone is going to follow him. And if everyone's going to follow him, there'll be a huge sort of kind of Christian revival, and then the Romans probably won't like it, and then maybe they'll clamp down on us and destroy our nation. And we've got to stop Jesus. And so it's actually from this point onwards that they begin to make specific plans for Jesus' death. There's a clue, actually, wasn't there, even in Thomas's reaction. You want to go to Judea? Are you sure, Jesus? In Judea, they're trying to kill you. It's not safe to go to Judea. And off Jesus goes right into Judea and raises Lazarus from the dead. It's right in the faces of his enemies. And then Mary, the sister of Lazarus, anoints Jesus' feet with perfume. Jesus says, she's preparing me for my burial. There's a very close connection in this account between Lazarus going from death to life and Jesus being killed. And Lazarus' resurrection is the trigger for Jesus' crucifixion. And I think Jesus knows that. He knows that to raise Lazarus from the dead will cost him his own life. Now, I mean, that's true politically. It's the trigger that gets him arrested and killed. It's also true theologically. There can't be a resurrection for Lazarus unless Jesus dies on the cross. It's true of all of us. Jesus cannot bring life to us as people who turned our backs on God, who live in a messed up world full of all kinds of evil, where we're part of the mess and part of the evil. God can't sort us out without a huge cost of sacrifice. And it all clicked into place for me. Here is Jesus. He hears Lazarus is dead. He knows he's going to raise him, but he thinks to himself, to raise Lazarus is going to cost me. I'm going to have to go to the cross for Lazarus to raise him from the dead. And so Jesus is deeply moved and very troubled, and he weeps at the thought of what it will take, what's ahead for him to bring life to Lazarus. And this just means something. This means that Jesus isn't just powerful. He is powerful. He has God's supernatural power to raise the dead, to do these miracles. It's not just that he's powerful, but he's very loving, because it costs him to be this powerful, to bring this answer. I think this is an unrivaled hope. Atheism, it's random. Stop asking the questions. It doesn't make sense to ask the questions. Why ask questions of random numbers? Hinduism, it's karma, it's payback, you're getting what's coming to you. Buddhism, it's really hard, but maybe just try to isolate yourself, detach yourself. Islam, it's the unquestioned will of Allah, don't ask. Christianity, a God powerful enough to fix death. A God so loving that he would die himself to fix death. A God who loves these disciples. I'm glad that I wasn't there, so that I could give you not blind faith, so that I could give you concrete evidence on the basis of which you can believe. And a God who is deeply moved, troubled at what awaits him on the cross, and yet goes through with it, raises Lazarus, allows himself to be nailed to a cross, dies to bring life to the world. This really is a better hope, the best hope, really the only hope. Thank you so much for listening. There'll be, if you're able to come tomorrow, there'll be more to say about Jesus' death, particularly tomorrow evening. But I'm going to hand back over to Robbie to tell us what's next.
Thanks, Andrew. And thanks to all of you, too, for coming. We really hope you've enjoyed this Something Better event, that you found it interesting and intriguing. And if you're curious to find out more, I'd love to share just a few ways that you can keep exploring the claims of Jesus Christ. As Andrew mentioned, tomorrow, it's a Sunday. We have 3 services in here at 10 o'clock, 11:45 and 5 p.m. Andrew's going to be joining them for each one of them, and you're so welcome to come back. There's a bookstall at the back here, and there's that book that Andrew mentioned, Beyond the Big Sea. There's others too. lots exploring Christianity or asking questions about Christianity, you're very welcome to browse them. And Andrew's book is free, as I mentioned earlier. And on the chair, just to let you know, there are 3 items that you might be sitting on or that might fall on the floor or something like that. One is the eyewitness account of Jesus' life, John's Gospel, which is yours to take away. And can I just say, if you've never read a copy of one of the eyewitness accounts of Jesus' life as a thinking adult, then I strongly recommend you do that. It doesn't take very long at all to do it. You can do it with a pen and enjoy thinking and exploring a bit more. There's also a flyer for something called Real Life Jesus. If you enjoyed this evening or found any of the things that we've talked about interesting, or you're interested in finding out more, then you're so welcome to come back. It's every Monday evening in June, an event a little bit like this, but slightly less formal. There'll be a bit more time for discussion if you'd like it, but similar talks exploring the Christian faith. And finally, a little feedback card. We'd love to hear how you found the event. And if you have any questions or comments and would like a response, then please feel free to leave some kind of contact. I just want to say one last time that we've covered some events this evening that are quite big and for some might have raised up all sorts of things. And if you'd like to talk to Andrew or to Lara or to any of the members of church staff here, then please feel free to do so. Once again, thanks so much for coming. We really hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.